June 6, 1944. Major Pluskat's quiet morning on Omaha Beach at dawn on June 6, 1944. Major Werner Pluskat of the German 352nd Artillery Regiment stood in his observation bunker, high on a cliff nearly 300 feet above Omaha Beach. The world below him was quiet and gray, wrapped in a damp mist that clung to the air and silenced every sound from the English Channel. He had been awake for hours. Aircraft had droned overhead through the night reconnaissance planes, he assumed, and there were rumors of paratroopers inland, but nothing seemed unusual. Alerts had become routine. For weeks, the coast had been on edge after intelligence reports hinted that an Allied invasion might come soon. Yet, soon was a vague word. Days, weeks, even months away. But that morning, something began to change. As the first light broke across the horizon, Pluskat raised his binoculars and scanned the gray sea. What he saw was not the tide nor a shift in weather, it was something entirely different. A dark line began to form where the sky met the water, growing sharper, wider, and multiplying with each passing second. Before a single Allied soldier touched the sand, before the names Omaha or Utah had any meaning, Major Pluskat realized the truth. He was witnessing the impossible. It wasn't a fleet, it was a city of steel, a floating metropolis emerging from the mist and sailing straight into history. Pluskat had spent his life in uniform. He had survived the frozen hell of the Eastern Front and watched entire armies vanish in the brutal machinery of total war. He understood scale. He understood power. But what he now saw through those lenses was beyond comprehension, a force so immense it defied the limits of imagination. Landing craft filled the sea, hundreds, then thousands, so densely packed they looked like iron filings drawn to a magnet. Behind them loomed destroyers and cruisers, and beyond them, the vast silhouettes of battleships dominating the horizon. The official number would later confirm it: 7,000 vessels from 8 nations, the largest amphibious armada in human history. Nearly 200,000 men were preparing to land in the first wave alone. The sheer industrial might it took to assemble and coordinate such power could not be matched anywhere on Earth. But to Pluskat, this wasn't a statistic. It was a physical reality, a declaration that bent the horizon and shattered every notion of warfare he had ever known. It said, "We have resources you cannot imagine, and we are spending them to destroy you." His hands trembled as he reached for the field telephone. He was a professional soldier, trained to stay calm. But what he was witnessing stripped away every layer of composure. "This is Pluskat at Observation Post 1, he said, voice strained but steady. "I have visual on the channel. There are ships, many ships." The voice that answered him was dismissive, almost bored. "We have reports of a few vessels in the eastern sector, possibly a raid." "Stand by," Pluskat wanted to shout. The words felt hopelessly small against what his eyes were showing him. Pressing the binoculars tighter against his face, he stared again. The sea was filled from horizon to horizon. "You don't understand," he said urgently. "It's not a few ships. The entire sea is covered. I can see nothing but ships and water. This is it, the invasion." But disbelief came through the line. "Sea conditions are not suitable," the operator replied. "No landing is possible today." Pluskat almost laughed at the absurdity. The fog was lifting, and the city of steel before him was real, undeniably real. "For God's sake," he shouted, "I am looking at it with my own eyes. The invasion fleet is here now." He slammed the phone down, the bunker filling with stunned silence. His junior officers stared, waiting for orders. They had heard everything. They understood, or were beginning to. The German command system at Normandy was crippled by a fatal failure of imagination, built on months of intelligence that pointed in the wrong direction. Their analysts were certain the invasion would come at the Pas de Calais, the narrowest point of the channel, the logical choice. That was where the elite divisions waited, where the heaviest artillery and best equipment were concentrated. Normandy, by comparison, seemed secondary. General Dietrich Krase of the 352nd Infantry Division had trained his men well, but his forces were spread thin, designed for mobility, not defense against a massive landing. His strategy: hold the beaches lightly, then counterattack inland with sound only if reinforcements could arrive swiftly. But those reinforcements were stationed hundreds of kilometers away, reserved for the real invasion expected at Calais. Hours would pass before they could move, and in those hours, the beaches would fall. German intelligence had built its conclusions on logic, and logic said the Allies would land where it made the most sense. But the Allies had learned what Germany had forgotten. The greatest advantage in war is not logic, it is surprise. Pluskat finally receives orders to engage. Major Pluskat's hands moved almost automatically as he connected to regimental headquarters. Desperate to reach anyone with authority, anyone who could grasp the scale of what he was witnessing and authorize a response. At last, he reached Lieutenant Colonel Acker, his regimental commander. "The invasion fleet is here," Pluskat reported, his voice rapid and breathless, urgency flooding every word. 10,000 ships, perhaps more. I cannot count them. The horizon is filled. The sea is black with them. Acker hesitated, skepticism thick in his tone. Every rule of German experience told him this was impossible. The meteorological office had predicted rough seas and poor visibility. An invasion in such weather violated every known principle of amphibious warfare. "Are you certain?" he asked. The question felt absurd. Pluskat was a seasoned officer, not prone to exaggeration. "The weather is clear enough to see the end of the world," Pluskat snapped. "And it's sitting in the English Channel, requesting permission to open fire." That cut through. Acker finally believed him. The chain of command began to move, but the moment for decisive action had already passed. The German reserves that might have reinforced the beaches were still hundreds of kilometers away. Command centers were paralyzed, still debating whether this was the true invasion or merely a diversion. And far to the east, in Hitler's headquarters, confusion was even greater. The Führer was asleep, and his staff dared not wake him. By the time he was informed, by the time his orders filtered through layers of bureaucracy, precious hours had slipped away, and with them, Germany's only chance to seize the initiative. Pluskat didn't wait. He was an artillery officer. He knew his duty. Orders or not, he would fight. He shouted commands to his men, rousing them from the haze of drills and false alarms. They scrambled to their stations, eyes wide with disbelief as they peered out at the vastness of the sea. None of their training had prepared them for what they were seeing, a fleet so immense it seemed to blot out the horizon. Ammunition crews hauled heavy shells from storage, hands shaking as they loaded the guns. Rangefinders shouted coordinates that felt unreal, distances too vast to comprehend. The great barrels, silent for so long, lifted slowly into position, black muzzles turning toward the invaders. Pluskat raised his binoculars again. Through the mist, he could see the landing craft forming into precise assault waves. The air itself seemed to vibrate, a low, ring hum from thousands of engines. It was the sound of industrial power, of a superpower breathing before the strike. Then, just before 6 o'clock a.m., the order came through: engage at will. For Pluskat, the words were a release. The paralysis of disbelief shattered, replaced by the clean focus of action. Training took over. He shouted the firing commands, and seconds later the bunker shook. The first gun thundered, then another, and another, each discharge a concussive roar that sent tons of steel screaming through the sky. Pluskat tracked the shells through his lenses, watching their faint arcs vanish into the haze, waiting for impact. For a fleeting moment, a sense of professional pride flickered. His gunners were precise, efficient, deadly. But as explosions bloomed far out at sea, that pride twisted into something colder, a deep, growing dread. He was witnessing history's greatest invasion begin, and nothing he or his men could do would be enough to stop it. Futility and fire. The Atlantic wall crumbles. Water erupted in towering plumes across the fleet. Near misses, one after another. Pluskat's men adjusted quickly, trained reflexes kicking in. They corrected their aim, compensating for wind, distance, and the rolling motion of the earth beneath them. The guns thundered again and again in a steady rhythm. Load, aim, fire, repeat. Shells splashed into the sea, sending geysers skyward. Some struck home, ship burning briefly before vanishing behind the haze. But for every vessel they damaged, 100 more advanced, untouched. The scale was hopeless. For every hit they managed, 10 more ships appeared beyond it. A heavy, sinking sense of futility washed over Pluskat. He felt like a man trying to empty the ocean with a bucket. His artillery was powerful, designed to destroy ships. But what meaning did power have when faced with an endless tide? What was victory when outnumbered by infinity? Beyond his own shell impacts, he saw the bigger picture: the Allied battleships, giants like the USS Texas, now turning their 14-inch guns toward the shore. Their main batteries were colossal, designed for a different kind of war, their thunder about to rewrite the laws of combat. Then came the reply. It began as a deep, distant growl, a low rumble across the water that grew until the horizon flashed like a storm of silent lightning. Pluskat braced himself. He had heard accounts of naval bombardments before, but words could never capture the experience. Seconds later, the air tore apart around him. The ground buckled and heaved. Walls shook as geysers of dirt and debris erupted from the cliffs and fields, craters large enough to swallow trucks forming in seconds. The systematic dismantling of the Atlantic Wall had begun. His bunker shuddered violently. Dust fell from the ceiling, cracks spreading through the concrete as the earth itself convulsed. He clung to the observation slit, the world vibrating beneath his hands. Through the haze and the chaos, he saw the landing craft beginning to hit the beach. The Higgins boats dropped their ramps, spewing lines of American soldiers into the churning surf. From his high vantage point, Pluskat watched the impossible unfold. Machine guns from German pillboxes opened up instantly, raking the open beaches with fire. Men fell in droves, collapsing, crawling, disappearing into the red surf. The sea turned dark with blood. The 352nd Infantry Division was exacting a brutal price. The Americans were brave, trained, determined, but they faced a wall of prepared defenses and merciless crossfire. For a brief moment, it seemed as though the defense might hold. The beaches were death traps. The casualty rate was staggering. Historians would one day record Omaha Beach as one of the bloodiest days in American military history. For those first minutes, it looked like the Germans had stopped the invasion cold. But then, the tide shifted. Allied destroyers offshore, seeing the slaughter, made a desperate decision. They turned toward the beach, closing the distance in defiance of every rule of naval safety. Some came within 1,000 yards of the sand, scraping their hulls against hidden sandbars and obstacles as they opened fire directly on the German fortifications. The precision was terrifying. One by one, the machine gun nests and bunkers that had devastated the Americans began to vanish under concentrated naval gunfire. Alongside them came strange vehicles, amphibious tanks and trucks that crawled straight out of the sea, spitting water as they rolled onto the sand. Pluskat stared in disbelief. The Germans had nothing like them. For every problem the defenders had prepared for, the Allies seemed to have engineered a countermeasure. Their machines were specialized, purpose-built for this exact day, this exact beach. And in that moment, something inside Pluskat shifted. The soldier in him went quiet. His mind, trained for tactics and firing solutions, gave way to something colder, a terrifying clarity. He no longer saw ships and men. He saw what stood behind them, the factories. Through his trembling binoculars, he looked past the warships and envisioned the world that had built them, the assembly lines of Detroit. The endless belts of machines producing trucks, tanks, and aircraft on a scale beyond imagination. He saw not just an invasion, but an entire system of production and logistics at work. The ability to feed, arm, and replace hundreds of thousands of men on foreign soil without pause. It wasn't magic. It was math. It was the arithmetic of industry. The sky above told the same story. It swarmed with Allied planes, bombers, transports, and fighters in endless procession. On that single day, the Luftwaffe would manage barely 300 sorties across all of France. The Allies flew over 14,000. The numbers defied comprehension. For every German aircraft, there were 40 Allied ones. This wasn't a failure of German bravery. Their pilots were among the best. Nor was it a failure of skill or courage. It was the factories again, the unstoppable machinery of production that made courage irrelevant. American industry was producing planes faster than Germany could shoot them down. The outcome wasn't decided by tactics anymore. It was decided by mathematics. And then came the tanks. Pluskat knew the legend of the Panzers, the Tigers and Panthers, kings of the battlefield, capable of destroying multiple Shermans in open combat. Technically, they were superior in every way. Thicker armor, better guns, unmatched optics. But that superiority, Pluskat realized, was an illusion. It was a dead end. For every Tiger the Reich could build, America could build dozens of Shermans. It was quantity made into destiny. The first shells landed wide columns of water erupting harmlessly in the midst of the Allied fleet. A miss, then another. But Pluskat's men were skilled and disciplined. They recalibrated their aim, adjusting for wind and distance, firing in a steady rhythm that came from years of relentless training. Again and again, the artillery thundered. The gun crews moved like machinery, loading, aiming, firing, each motion practiced to perfection. Explosions dotted the water's surface, some striking true, most swallowed by the sea. For every vessel they managed to damage, 100 more pressed forward untouched. For every ship that slowed or turned, 10 more appeared behind it. A suffocating sense of futility washed over Pluskat. He felt like a man with a bucket, trying to empty an ocean. His guns were powerful, capable of sinking ships. But what did that matter when thousands stood beyond his reach? What did victory mean when the odds themselves defied imagination? As he peered through his binoculars, the scale of it hit him, the Allied battleships now swinging their immense 14-inch guns toward the coast. Vessels like the USS Texas preparing to unleash a storm of steel. These were weapons built for a different kind of war, massive, methodical, unstoppable. Then came the reply. It began as a low growl from across the channel, flashes of light flickering like distant lightning. Pluskat's stomach sank. He knew what was coming, but no briefing could prepare him for the reality. Seconds later, the world convulsed. The air itself tore apart as the shells landed, each impact a seismic event that sent walls trembling and dust raining from the ceiling. Cracks spread across the bunker's concrete, and the ground heaved as if alive. The systematic destruction of the Atlantic Wall had begun. Gripping the cold steel of the observation slit, Pluskat steadied himself and looked out. Through the haze, he could see the invasion unfolding, the landing craft slamming into the surf, ramps dropping, and men spilling into the water. American troops surged forward through the waves as German machine guns opened up, stitching deadly lines across the beach. From his vantage point, Pluskat watched the horror in motion. Men collapsing under fire, bodies floating in the tide, the surf itself turning red. The 352nd Infantry Division was exacting a brutal toll. The Americans fought with courage and discipline, but the prepared defenses were devastatingly effective. For a moment, it seemed the Germans might hold. The Americans were pinned, casualties mounting by the minute. History would remember this as one of the bloodiest days in U.S. military history. For a brief, fragile instant, it looked as if the defense was working until the destroyers moved in. Seeing the slaughter, Allied destroyers broke formation and charged directly toward the shore. It was reckless, almost suicidal, but it changed everything. Some close to within 1,000 yards, scraping over sandbars and underwater obstacles to bring their guns to bear. Their fire was devastatingly precise. One by one, the German bunkers that had held the beach under fire were obliterated. Alongside this came a new, bewildering sight: strange amphibious vehicles, trucks that seemed to drive straight out of the sea. The Germans had nothing like them. Every weapon, every tactic they had prepared for seemed suddenly obsolete. For every defensive measure, the Allies had an answer, and that realization struck Pluskat like a physical blow. Something shifted inside him. The soldier in him, the tactician, the professional, fell silent. What replaced it was a cold, clinical clarity. He wasn't just seeing ships or soldiers anymore. He was seeing the machinery behind them, the system that made all this possible. In his mind's eye, he could see Detroit, the assembly lines, the foundries, the endless production floors where trucks, tanks, and aircraft engines rolled off in an unbroken rhythm. This invasion wasn't a miracle of courage or strategy. It was the inevitable outcome of industrial supremacy. Every crate of ammunition, every jeep, every ration pack was proof of a nation's manufacturing power. Above him, the sky was alive with aircraft. The Allies would fly over 14,000 sorties that day. The Luftwaffe barely 300 across all of France. For every German plane, 40 Allied ones filled the sky. It wasn't a failure of courage or training. Germany still had brave, skilled pilots. It was a failure of arithmetic. The Allies were producing aircraft faster than Germany could destroy them. The math had become destiny. And then came the tanks. Pluskat knew the reputation of the panzers, the fearsome tigers and panthers that dominated battlefields. In a straight fight, a single tiger could destroy multiple Shermans. But that advantage had become meaningless. The tigers were masterpieces of engineering and disasters of production. They were expensive, complex, prone to mechanical failure, and slow to repair. For every tiger that left a German factory, the Allies built dozens of Shermans, simple, rugged, and relentless. In 1944 alone, the United States produced more than 29,000 tanks. Germany, across all types, never reached 2,000 per month. The Allies weren't seeking perfection. They were seeking suffocating abundance. They would win not by quality, but by overwhelming quantity, by burying the panzers under mountains of steel that never stopped coming. That was the new law of war, the industrial equation of defeat. All the speeches about willpower and ideological purity crumbled before it. Nazi ideology had promised that faith and unity could overcome material disadvantage. But no amount of belief could stop a bomber. No speech could sink a battleship. No zeal could produce 20,000 tanks while your factories burned. You could not will ships, planes, or soldiers into existence without the material to arm them. Pluskat felt a hollow, almost spiritual despair. His men were good soldiers, disciplined, courageous, and skilled, but they were fighting a war that had already been lost, not through weakness or cowardice, but through numbers. The truth was merciless. The war had been decided long before that morning, decided not on the sands of Normandy, but in the factories of America. For Pluskat and thousands like him, the end of the Third Reich didn't come in Berlin. It came in that moment of revelation when the sea itself seemed to turn to steel, when the sky filled with endless machines, when he realized he was not facing an army, but an entire civilization mobilized for war. This was a new kind of conflict, fought not in trenches or foxholes, but on assembly lines thousands of miles away. And as he looked out across that steel horizon, Pluskat understood the inescapable truth. Germany had lost, not to superior soldiers or strategy, but to the cold arithmetic of industry. The factories had spoken, and their language was victory.